Hi, this is Joe from Mappamundi, and today I'd like to talk about something that someone asked recently, and that is why does the Latin language have 3 genders, and most of the Romance languages that come from Latin only have 2 genders? So this is a topic that's very interesting for me to talk about because the evolution of Romance languages is something that I really enjoy researching and discussing. So in the Latin language, as I already said before, there were 3 genders. There was masculine, feminine, and neuter. And those genders didn't have anything to do with the perceived masculinity or femininity of the object in question. It was just a way of grouping the words together and showing to what kind of grammatical pattern they belonged. One of the main things about the Latin language is all the nouns in the language are declined, which means they change their endings slightly to indicate the grammar of the sentence. So in a sentence in English like water is blue and I have water, the word is water in both cases, even though in the first situation it's the subject and in the second situation it's the direct object. In the Latin language, we would have to change those endings slightly to indicate the difference between the subject and the object. For these declinations in the Latin language, there are 5 main patterns that can happen, and there are some slight deviations to those patterns. But most of the words in the Latin language belong to the first 3 patterns. A majority of the nouns in the Latin language are from the first 3 declinations that we can see. And if we look at an example here, we can see how those declinations work. And we can see that the first declination is a, I, am, a. The second declination changes based on whether the word is neuter or based on whether the word is masculine. And they are quite similar though, so we can see that there's a small deviation depending on whether the word is masculine or neuter. For the masculine we have us, I, o, o, and for the neuter we have I, o, o. Now, one of the main things that happened when Latin was evolving into the Romance languages was a loss of the final consonant sound. We can see that all over the place where these final sounds, these final t sounds, these final d sounds, they go away when Latin is evolving into the Romance languages. And that's something that happens in historical linguistics a lot, where a lot of times final sounds, people get lazy in the way that they speak, and these final sounds tend to disappear from the ends of words. So if you look at an example like the ones I showed in the chart of the declinations, the only thing that's really separating a masculine word in the second declension and a neuter word in the second declension are the final consonant sounds. If you drop those final consonant sounds, then the second declension, both masculine and neuter, they kind of look synonymous to one another. So if you consider that the only thing marking them as different are the final consonant sounds, if those consonant sounds go away, then they kind of become the same gender. And for people that are speaking a language in its vulgar form that are maybe not kind of classically educated in their own language, they're not going to know these kinds of grammatical concepts like gender. It's going to be something that comes naturally to them, right? Even if we look at Romance languages now, native speakers of Romance languages with gender, it's something that they don't have to like conceptualize on a grammatical level. They can if they want to, obviously, but knowing when to say el or la, or knowing when to say le or la, or il or la, those are things that come naturally to a native speaker of a Romance language. So if you're speaking Vulgar Latin in that time period and you come across a masculine noun that ends in u or a neuter noun that ends in u, for you, knowing the distinction between whether it's masculine or neuter, it's kind of pointless because with the absence of the final consonant sounds, those 2 forms are identical in any case. That third declension that I mentioned before, that's one that becomes a little bit more complicated. As you can see, the masculine and feminine forms, they are the same, and then the neuter forms are a little bit different. And the third declension in general is, it's not quite as regular for a Latin student because the nominative case and the genitive case, which forms the root, the kind of stem of the declension of the word, they do differ a little bit more than most first and second declension nouns do. And the thing about these third declension nouns is that even though in the nominative case most nouns in the first and second declensions end in a for the first declension, or us or for the second declension. I'm sure there are some exceptions that are not coming to me right now, but a majority of those words do end in a very regular ending in the nominative case. In the third declension, what the nominative version of the word is can vary quite a lot. The endings will fit some kind of regular way. We can have neuter words that kind of change. We can have I stem words that can kind of change the endings. But the nominative of the word for the third declension can change quite a bit. It can be kind of varied. So if we work under the decision that the neuter gender is already in dire straits due to the loss of final consonant sounds, we're working with a language where the neuter case is already becoming kind of like put to the side. So in situations with like the third declension where there's already a shift towards getting rid of the neuter case, we have to take those words and we have to kind of repurpose them into being either masculine or feminine. With those third declension nouns that already have genders in Latin, it's very easy because masculine will go to masculine and feminine will go to feminine. So with those third declension neuter nouns, those languages, they kind of had to make those nouns fit into one of the existing genders, which is now masculine and feminine. And we can see that those words tend to have a level of variance between the genders in the Romance languages. I'm not sure what the process was for a lot of those languages as they evolved to decide whether a neuter third declension noun would be masculine or feminine. But probably it was based on analogy, like if you have a word that sounds like another word that's masculine, you kind of assume that it's masculine. So I think that probably there was a process of kind of like analogy in saying that this word sounds like this word, that word's masculine, probably this word's masculine too. So we can see that even an example like the word for sea, as in like the ocean, the sea, that's a neuter word in the Latin language from the third declension. In Spanish we have el mar, in Italian we have il mare, but in French we have la mer. So it's feminine in French, but it's masculine in Spanish and Italian. And that's because they kind of had to haphazardly fit these neuter third declension nouns into one of the two valid genders as the language evolved. And we can see, even looking at Spanish and Portuguese, two languages that are very similar, that a lot of words that are masculine in Spanish are feminine in Portuguese. A good example are all the words that end in age in Spanish or agem in Portuguese. If I have the journey in Spanish, I have el viaje. If I have the journey in Portuguese, I have a viagem. So those words coming from neuter words in the Latin language now, they're being reanalyzed into Spanish as being masculine and being reanalyzed into Portuguese as being feminine. And I believe that's kind of based on the analogy of the languages, where probably there were other words in Portuguese that ended in agem that were feminine. So they said, okay, these words ended in agem, they're all feminine. And the opposite in Spanish, where age, maybe some words that ended in age were masculine. So they thought, okay, this is very clearly a masculine word. And we say oftentimes that the neuter is dead in the Romance languages, but I would say that it's not dead per se. It's just kind of like almost out of use. We can see some examples in Italian of words that come from the former neuter gender that are still changed as if they are neuter in Latin. And as there is no neuter gender in the Italian language, what generally happens is that the masculine is singular and the feminine is plural. And you can see how the Italian people would come up with that convention, because the masculine form has an O sound, which usually we associate with the masculine gender in Romance languages, and the plural version has an A sound, which we normally associate with feminine words in Romance languages. So a lot of words with body parts have this, where we have il braccio, le braccia, we have il ciglio, le ciglia, we have l'osso, le ossa, okay, il dito, le dita. So a lot of times these words, when they are made feminine in the plural, or when they have this kind of call back to the neuter gender, they oftentimes kind of reflect a feeling of collectiveness. If I say l'osso, le ossa means kind of all your bones in your body, le dita means all your fingers. But if I say ossi, it means I'm kind of talking about probably bones for cooking, I would say, like animal bones that you might put in a soup. You're not talking about a kind of like collective human skeleton, but you're talking about individual bones that you put into a soup or a broth or whatever kind of food you want to make. Same thing with ledita. Ledita, I'm talking about all your fingers. But if I say diti, I'm kind of taking away the collectiveness of the fingers, and I'm kind of trying to make them plural, but kind of individualized plural, if that makes any sense. In Romanian, you can see actually does kind of the same thing, where these neuter nouns, in the singular, they're considered masculine, and then in the plural, they're considered feminine, so it's the kind of same idea. I would say of the 5 main Romance languages, that Italian and Romanian tend to have the most in common when it comes to these kinds of like conventions. I believe there's also either Catalan or Occitan, I don't remember which one, where this kind of thought behind collective hair and collective bones, that kind of collective things are analyzed as being feminine in the plural, and when you pick them apart and make them plural but individual, then they are masculine in the plural. And I have to double check that. I couldn't find any examples just now, but I'm pretty sure that that's how it works in either Catalan or Occitan as well. Talking about the breakdown of how genders get fit into other genders in languages is something that I find very interesting. For example, in English, we used to have 3 genders. We had masculine, feminine, and neuter. We can still see examples of that in pronouns where I say he, she, and it. He's masculine, she's feminine, it is neuter. But our nouns don't carry any kind of like gender with them in the way that we use them grammatically, if that makes any sense, besides when we say pronouns like he or she or him or her. Without pronouns, there's really no indication of gender in the English language, and I can talk about why we lost those genders pretty early on in English, and the phenomenon as to why that happened. So I hope you found that video interesting. I really enjoyed talking about historical linguistics, especially in the context of Romance languages. That's kind of, I think, my favorite branch to talk about. Maybe Germanic could be also one of my favorites. For more videos talking about language, be sure to subscribe to my channel, Mappa Mundi Languages, for a new video coming out every Friday.